Anderson heaving one down the sideline, and he's got Cass Allen over the top. Big side, down the sideline. Touchdown. His signature move and his signature performance. Allen did ball one more time. 58 yards this time.
You're listening to the Bruin Bible. This is your host, Will Decker, bringing you UCLA football content all throughout the year for LA Football Network.
What is up, LAFB fans? Will Decker, your host from the Bruin Bible, and draft is in session. We are here to talk about Bet Online and the good people behind the brand. Football season is officially back, and Bet Online remains your number one source for all your football betting needs this season. You'll find the latest odds, matchup info, player needs, and game trends. And as your continued source for all sports wagering info, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, live scores, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports and events like MLB, MMA, tennis, boxing, and even golf. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 100% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use promo code LAFB to receive your rewards. BetOnline, where the game starts. What is up, and welcome to the newest Bruin Bible edition. We have a game preview of the game that everyone's talking about nationally. College Game Day is making the appearance in Eugene, Oregon this weekend. And who better to preview this game than with Duck Territory and 247 Sports writer and reporter EriK Skopil. EriK, what is going on, my man? Are you out in Eugene right now as we speak?
Oh, yeah. I'm based in Eugene. I will be at the game. I'm on the ground covering the team. So yeah, I'm out in Eugene. I've been here for a while.
We got boots on the ground covering the Oregon Ducks. It's going to be a fun game, man. We got a lot of different elements, a lot of familiar faces in this game that, have been around the college football circuit for some time. And, Chip Kelly making his return back to Outson with a team with easily the best team he's had since he's been at UCLA. So a really, really fun event going forward. But EriK, I kind of want to start on a lighter note because I don't know you that well.
Okay.
One of the questions I ask with all the guests on this show is, what have you been binge watching as of late? I love hearing what people have been watching on the Netflix, Apple TV, different shows as a whole. Are you watching the new Game of Thrones show?
I sure am watching the new Game of Thrones show, man. I'll tell you what. And usually I cast a pretty wide net, but I've been kind of focused on the two fantasy shows the last month or so. The Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, and then the Lord of the Rings show. Yeah, which just wrapped up last week, I think. So, yeah, no, I don't know. I'm going to be watching after this weekend because I think it's the finale. But I'm all in. I'm a fantasy nerd and have been, and before it was popular to be one, and now everybody's into this stuff. So it's fun, and I probably spend as much time listening to breakdowns of different fantasy. Not fantasy football, but just fantasy television podcasts, as I do listening to like fantasy football or NFL or whatnot podcasts. So I'm all in on House of the Dragons. I assume you're into it.
Dude, very much so. And I'm, pretty much in the same boat you are. The Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy, was kind of my platform into this world. Harry Potter was my thing growing up. I was a huge Harry Potter fan. And just what Game of Thrones has meant, from a show standpoint, it's on the Mount Rushmore of my favorite shows of all time, so to speak. So House of Dragon has been great thus far, and I'm really excited at what they put into it. I have not seen the new Lord of the Rings show. I did see the price tag that it costs. What was it, $1 billion they put into this show? I was floored just at seeing that number because that is an inordinate amount of money going to a TV project, man. Was it worth the wait for this one?
I think it was. I don't think it's as good as the House of the Dragon, and I've been rewatching. Actually, I finished the second movie of Lord of the Rings trilogy last night. I just hadn't watched them in a couple decades, and I threw it on, and I was like, "This is significantly better than the other new TV spinoff, I guess." But I thought it was fun. I just like being in the worlds and kind of seeing what's going down. So, yeah, no, I recommend it. Give it a chance.
Absolutely, man. And kind of the way we want to start with this is maybe a Targaryen in another life. Bo Nix has kind of had a, coming out party of a whole coming out to Oregon, transferring from Auburn. Ironically, the biggest moment in his college football career thus far was when he beat Justin Herbert in Oregon and Dallas, Texas, in his first start as an Auburn Tiger back, I believe 2019 was that year that he came out. But Bo Nix has the rough game against Georgia. And let's face it, it's the number one team in the country. A lot of quarterbacks would struggle in that scenario. But to his credit, since then, he has been absolutely sensational. 12 touchdowns, only one interception since then. And what I keep telling these UCLA fans is we're not the only team with a dual threat quarterback out there. Bo Nix has really turned it up, rushing the football in the last few games. Give me your take on Bo Nix and what he's meaning to Oregon fans thus far, because he has really turned it around since just kind of a rough opening, to say the least.
Yeah, it was a really bad first impression, and it's probably similar to what UCLA fans felt about DTR 4 or 5 years ago, where the person arrives on campus, there are high expectations, and I can't tell you exactly DTR's first game, but I know his first couple of years weren't great. And there's sort of a sense of like, is this really the guy? And I think it's taken a couple of weeks following that for the Oregon fan base to kind of get behind him. I think the game against BYU was pretty impressive. The comeback in Pullman, I think, started to kind of win people over. I think that's where I kind of started going, okay, he has another year of eligibility if he wants to use it next year. And I think fans at that point kind of went, well, maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing if he comes back in 23. I'm not sure if he's really considering it or not, but I think for a while, it was kind of like, let's just let him be a placeholder guy for a year. I think there's some fans that are kind of now buying into Bo Nix as a long-term option. If he wants to be one, it's up to him. He could go pro after this year or pursue other opportunities, or he could come back. And, I think the last 2 weeks he's been excellent, as you mentioned, as a runner. I don't think there are many quarterbacks in the country with this impressive of a rushing stat line. I know he leads all quarterbacks, I think, in yards per attempt rushing. He has, I think, the second most touchdowns rushing with 8.
Yeah.
And as you said, like, I think if you combine just both the passing stuff, which has been really impressive with the running, since Georgia, 20 touchdowns combined, when you're talking about throwing or running, and just one turnover is really impressive for a quarterback who's kind of been known to be, I would say, a little bit up and down. Maybe is putting it lightly. Kind of known to be, you have good Bo, you have bad Bo, and good Bo's been kind of been the only
Awesome.
Bo, which has been kind of, I think, unexpected to a certain extent, because the sense, I think, after that Georgia game was this could be kind of an up and down season. And typically, if you have a quarterback who's playing the way he's playing, the way DTR is playing, the way some of these other quarterbacks in the Pac-12 are playing, it makes it an easier pill to swallow going into each weekend, kind of knowing what you're expecting to get there.
Yeah, and just the rushing numbers for the last 2 games, 14 carries, 211 yards, and 5 touchdowns just on the ground. And the game for me that really flipped the script on Bo Nix was the Washington State game. I think for a lot of Oregon fans as well, You're down 2 possessions late. You need 2 home run drives from Bo Nix. This is the classic situation we saw him in at Auburn, countless times, where they need the big play and he would, turn the ball over, miss an open receiver, and, Auburn would eventually lose. That game, he had everything right, and Oregon actually stole one on the road in Pullman. Just a huge performance from Bo Nix on that day. And it's just really allowed that to kind of catapult him forward. I believe he's second in the Pac-12 in completion percentage and top 5 in the country at 70.4 completion percent rate. That is a far cry from what he was completing at Auburn, where I think he only had 1 season of over 60% completion rate when he was at the Auburn Tigers. So Bo Nix has been as advertised. And, I want to go to the running game now, Eric. This is a fun one because I think in a lot of ways, UCLA and Oregon are very, very well-matched programs. When you look at the raw data, both these teams are number 1 and number 2, respectively, in run offense and run defense. So a lot of good things going on here. We have Charbonnet, who's kind of our, our bell cow, our number 1 back that we're just going to trot out there. We're going to give him the majority of the carries. You guys kind of do it with a committee, approach with 3 tailbacks already, or 2 tailbacks and Bo Nix, all having over 300 yards. Talk to me about the running game, specifically with Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington, because I think these guys are high-quality players in Kenny Dillingham's offense.
Yeah, and it's really kind of 4 players in the backfield. They rotate quite frequently. You'll see typically they open the first 4 drives of the game rotating between Irving and Whittington as kind of the primary guy in first and second. And then third down, if it's a passing situation, they bring in Sean Dollars. He plays almost exclusively on passing plays. And then if it's short yardage or goal line, they bring in the freshman Jordan James, who's been pretty effective in those situations. So they rotate between four. Byron Cardwell, who was the leading returning rusher from last year, was, I think, everybody's favorite probably back in the summer to be the leading rusher. He's dealing with an injury. He hasn't played for about a month. And I think some people would tell you he would provide a little bit of a different element here. And I think there's a sense he might come back sooner than later. Shoot, he might play this weekend. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, just based upon kind of the up and down nature of his season. He might also not play, which has been the case. He just seems like he's headed in the right direction. But I think Irving has been the one that's really surprised and impressed people the most. A unique change of direction in terms of his ability to get in and out of cuts. Really, really quick feet, really good balance, always falls forward. I think the usage, as you said, kind of separates him from some of the perceived better backs in the conference. I think you look at him, he's not, I think, what is he, 6th or something in the conference right now? He's not eighth.
No, he's 6th. Yeah. I was going to say in rushing. Yeah.
And I say that because he's attempting about 10, 12 yards per game, and almost every game. It's become an inside joke on our podcast because we do a prediction thing, and I always predict he'll run for 100 yards, and he always runs for like 97 because he carries it like 12 times. He is really dynamic and fun to watch, and I think my expectation is this will be an opportunity to really show himself on a bigger stage. Came from Minnesota, where he was kind of the backup last year, kind of never really a feature back. And now he is a feature back in an offense, which really rotates between a lot of running backs. And so I think his skill set is really unique, and you can go find some of the highlights of just how he makes people miss. And it's really unique. So I think he's become quickly a fan favorite. And Whittington, another transfer, came from Western Kentucky, same school as the running backs coach, Carlos Laughlin. He kind of brought him over. Whittington is a hard nose between the tackles. He's got a little bit more, I would say, maybe one cut and go guy, kind of gets a foot in the ground and isn't afraid to run people over. He's got a little bit of breakaway speed. I think that surprises folks, but I think that combination is really impressive. And like I said, the two other guys, Dollars and James, will spell both of them, but primarily in certain situations.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it. Bucky Irving averaging 7.2 yards a carry on only 60 carries this season. You mentioned the 2 games with 97 yards, Stanford, and then the upset win over BYU after losing to Georgia, which was huge. And then with Whittington, you mentioned the breakaway speed last week, or last game you guys had, a 55-yard touchdown run, so he was sensational there. When it comes to the Ducks and the receiving room, we have to ask specifically about our guy, Chase Cota, because he was a favorite for UCLA. We loved him a lot. And he transfers with a year of eligibility, and he's been a solid option for you guys. It's been, he's the second leading receiver on the team, close to 20 catches, close to 300 yards, has been just a nice move the chains type of player. What have you guys seen from Chase Cota that gives you confidence he can have a big game against his old school?
First of all, what you guys like Chase Cota there? I was curious because the stats were always kind of underwhelming, but and I kind of had, so it's funny because Chase is from the state and I've covered recruiting here, so I watched him quite a bit in high school. I thought he would be more productive at UCLA.
Yeah. And
then of course I don't watch every UCLA game, and the stats coming in were kind of like, okay, what is Oregon getting? He's outproduced what I expected. So what was kind of, was there a hang up at UCLA the last couple of years? I'm just curious because I when he came in, my perception was maybe he's a 5th or 6th guy, and he's pretty quickly become probably the number 2 behind Troy Franklin.
Yeah, the numbers were never there, but he was kind of just the guy in the wide receiver room that made everybody feel great. He was great to the media. So we all rooted really hard for Chase. Obviously did not reach, I think it was the Army All-American game that he was participated in. So, it was rough. He didn't really have a place for it, but to kind of put that in comparison, we've got a great slot receiver right now, Logan Loya, who's very similar game to Chase. It's just kind of like the Chip Kelly doghouse. There's too many options out there where you just can't give him the ball all the time. Obviously, Loya had the huge touchdown catch on the screen pass against Utah, but that's accounted for, 50% of his receiving yards this season on like a 77-yard gain. So we always loved Coda, the personality, the fun-spirited guy. Unfortunately, we didn't get as many, reps and, opportunities with him as we'd like, but we root for him still. I mean, he's a Bruin, graduated from UCLA. So yeah, he's looked great for you guys. I'm really excited about him. And then Troy Franklin, man, another receiver that's tearing up the Pac-12 and, could be on like a second team or third team all Pac-12, list if he was able to kind of fill out for the rest of the season. What have you seen from him?
So really highly regarded recruit. I think the second highest rated wide receiver Oregon's ever signed. This is his sophomore season. He and Dante Thornton, we talk about Chase Cota. Everybody expected Dante Thornton would start at Z and it would be Chase at X and Troy at X. And Chase kind of jumped Dante at the Z position. And Dante and Troy came in as, I think, the second and third highest rated receiver recruits Oregon ever signed back in the 2021 class. So these are second-year players that were really expected to kind of be this dynamic tandem. And Dante's shown flashes as kind of a deep ball guy, but that's basically it. And now Chase has basically taken over that to the point where I don't think Thornton even played in Tucson. But Troy is, I think, to me, one of the more gifted wide receivers Oregon's had since I've been covering this team, and then years before that, growing up in Eugene, following and being a fan. Super gifted route runner, really understands kind of the way to find open space. I think great feet, great footwork. Just has an understanding of kind of ways to put defenders in tough spots, and somebody who wins a lot of one-on-one matchups. And the other thing that's been impressive too is a couple times this year is the contested catches. When he doesn't beat guys, is the ability to make diving catches or to out-leap players for the ball. So I think he's quickly emerged as Bo Nix's favorite target and has shown a little bit more vertically than expected. I think I don't know what he runs in the 40. I'm bad with that kind of thing, but I think he's got decent speed. That's not really what sets him apart. That's more of a Dante Thornton, Chris Hudson. Those are a couple other Oregon receivers. But he's gotten deep a couple times on like deep posts and stuff like that and made contested catches that have been really impressive. So from a receiving game perspective, he's undoubtedly their top target. I think Chase is somebody that they look to quite a bit on kind of tough downs as well. And then the rest of the receivers are basically going to be used in screen game stuff. They'll go to Chris Hudson. They'll go to Seven McGee in the screen game. Those are smaller slot guys, quick guys, but maybe not players they'll throw downfield to. And then if Dante Thornton is a part of the rotation, that's a guy who can certainly get behind the defense. He's big, fast, athletic, all that.
Yeah, and then Terrence Ferguson, just from a red zone weapon, 4 touchdowns on the year has been really nice in those areas. So Oregon, the receiving room is not a problem for them. I want to move into the defensive side of the football. And coming into this year, we did a Pac-12 preseason rankings of each position group. And your guys' defensive line and your linebacking group ranked in at number 1 in the preseason rankings. When you see the numbers against the run, it's been very impressive. Who are the guys that stand out to you on the defensive line and in the linebacker room? Dorless, obviously a great name there. Sewell is, a national name. We knew about him coming in this year. But outside of those guys, and if you want to, talk about those guys as well, we can. Who have been some guys that you've been really impressed with in the front seven for the Oregon Ducks?
Yeah, I think the defensive line has played really well most weeks. I think the linebackers have probably been a little underwhelming, to be honest with you. Both Sewell and Justin Flo have been kind of dinged up all year. Flo's been in and out of the lineup. The Arizona game was the first time all season Flo's played more than 50% of the snaps. He actually missed a couple games. My kind of the hope, I think, around the program is that this bye week gave an opportunity for him to get healthy, and for Noah, who he plays every game because he's an animal, and he's, that's just kind of an Iron Man mentality. But you go watch the way he's moving around. He'd been limping pretty heavily on the right side there. You kind of wonder where he's at health-wise, because those are two really high-end linebackers, and those guys will play a lot. And I think in this matchup could be pretty pivotal just in terms of the way UCLA tries to attack a defense. And so those guys need to be on their best. Up front, Dorless is definitely the star of the show. He's the best defensive lineman. I think he's one of the better defensive linemen out west. He's moved outside. He was playing more interior positions last year. He's now more of a defensive end. has been productive as a pass rusher, productive on rundowns. I think he's kind of got the whole package there. Maybe we'd like to see him a little more sure of a tackler. I think there's been times where he's kind of in open space, and it's hard to ask a 290, 300-pound guy to go tackle a running back in open space sometimes. But there's been times where you're kind of like, oh, he's out there and he doesn't finish the play, and it's a little disappointing because he's been able to get off blocks and get upfield really consistently. It's just about finishing plays sometimes with him. But I think there's been 3 transfers this year that have filled in as interior guys that have been really impressive because Oregon brought back Popa Amavai, who was another honorable mention off defensive lineman. He's out for the year. He broke his foot in fall camp. And they've slid in a couple Nebraska transfers and then a Washington transfer. And those 3, Casey Rogers, Jordan Riley, and Taki Taimani, have really been, I think, exceeding expectations in the middle there. Riley and Taimani are kind of your first true nose tackle body types Oregon has had in several years. These are 330, 340-pound humans. These are big, big people. The last couple of years before that, Oregon was good against the run without kind of having one of those guys. I think Amavai was really your nose, and he was playing closer to like 305, 310 maybe. But these 2 are just really big kind of space eaters in the middle and pretty integral to the run defense. And then Casey Rogers, to me, has been, I would say, maybe among the transfers, the biggest surprise for me, because this is a guy who played in and out of the lineup at Nebraska, weren't kind of sure what you were getting. He started every game this year. He's graded out, according to PFF, really well. And I just think is somebody who has become very reliable in that front group. DJ Johnson off the edge is notable as a pass rusher. He leads the team in sacks. A player who's been around forever. I think he's his 6th year. But a guy who's really athletic and dynamic off the edge.
Yeah, and I read Bruce Feldman's, freak list, as every college football fan does, and I saw the DJ Johnson piece. He was a former tight end, I believe, and he just switched over to the defensive side of the ball.
Here's his career path. I'll run it through you really quickly, and then we can move on if you want. He started at Miami as an outside linebacker, came to Oregon, moved to defensive end, moved to outside linebacker, moved to tight end, moved back to outside linebacker, and then back to tight end the same season because of injuries. And then this year finally is playing outside linebacker again, which I think is where he's kind of always wanted to play, but they've just moved him around. So he's played everywhere. But yeah, started as a defensive player, then moved to offense, then back to defense.
And I got the report from the spring game. He was just unblockable, in that game. I think he got, you can't really sack the quarterback in the spring game, but he got around 4 would-be sacks in that game. So
right.
DJ Johnson, just a monster, and somebody that UCLA is going to have to contain completely when it comes to that area. When it comes to the secondary, the main headliner, Christian Gonzalez, the Colorado transfer. Speaking of Bruce Feldman, I saw him just do a piece with Christian Gonzalez this week on the Pac-12 network. They did a nice little interview. Has been, as advertised, pretty much 5 pass deflections and interception. Still looks the part of a guy that is going to be picked on either the late first or second day of the NFL draft. Give me your thoughts on Gonzalez, because I think this guy is an incredible corner and somebody that they're going to have to, really watch out for, especially if Bobo is going to be blanketed by him all game.
Yeah, he's a really unique player at that position. I mean, when I first saw him on campus, I was like, he looks more like what would have been a decade ago, like an outside linebacker for him. He's a really big kid. He's like 6'2", 210, long arms, really well put together, broad shoulders, the whole 9 there. And yet he's really impressive with his footwork. He's quick, he's athletic. He has a knack for the football, and he's really physical at the point of attack. I think that's sort of what's impressed me the most is I think he's been outstanding in coverage, but when he does get beat, he typically is able to recover and at least make a play on the ball. He's clearly their best defensive back. I don't think there's much question. Bennett Williams, the safety, is probably, if there is a competition, he's the team's leading tackler. He's probably in the conversation as well. But the secondary has been a bit up and down this year, and Gonzalez has really been kind of the most consistent player there, and somebody who, I thought it was notable last game against Jacob Cowing, a smaller guy in the slot. They had Gonzalez play most of his snaps there, just kind of ISOing him one-on-one there, whereas most weeks they've had him on the outside facing bigger receivers. So I'll be interested to see on this Bobo matchup with Gonzalez, because It's a very different type of player to Cowing. I thought he handled himself pretty darn well in that game. Cowing had some big catches, but most of those were against Trikweze Bridges, the other starting corner. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this matchup plays out because to my kind of, I would say somewhat untrained, somewhat trained eye, I think what Gonzalez provides physically is the type of player that could give Bobo some difficulty because he is a little bit bigger at 6'2", 210 pounds. I think Bobo's 6'5", 220, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that matchup's going to be interesting to see because this is not a traditional, like Oregon's had a lot of good corners. Most of them have been like sub 6 foot kind of guys. This is he's built more like a free safety or something as opposed to a strict corner. And same thing with Trikweze Bridges, the other corner who's about 6'4", 210 pounds. He's had trouble in coverage though. He's gotten beat a couple times downfield. But Oregon has really big athletic corners, but guys that have been, I would say, especially Bridges, susceptible against faster guys on the outside, especially on like double moves and route combinations like that.
Yeah, and we have something similar with UCLA. A kid by the name of Devin Kirkwood was a 4-star down in Southern California. He's a starting true sophomore. He's making mistakes, but the talent level's there, and that's the NFL type of body that they're looking for, the big body corners that match up nice with those NFL level receivers. EriK, if Oregon is going to lose this weekend, what has to go right for UCLA to make that happen?
I think there's probably two things I'm focused on the most when UCLA has the football. And the first is just how cleanly does DTR play. And I think in general, these quarterbacks are two of the best out West. And I almost feel like some of this is which quarterback makes the bigger mistakes, which player slips up a little bit. Because if both these guys play perfect, then to me, it's a shootout. It's really fun. It's high scoring. But I also feel like in a game like this, I know these are both veteran guys. Typically, it's a guy makes a mistake. So maybe a little bit of that Bo Nix, kind of bad Bo Nix comes out. He doesn't perform very well, and DTR plays out of his mind like he's done all season. And then I think the other thing is, and you mentioned, is that kind of the strength-on-strength part there of the both run games being really strong against really good run defenses. And I think the obvious solution here for UCLA is is able to run the football really effectively to set up some passes downfield, and Oregon can't run the ball effectively and forces Bo Nix to have to kind of play hero ball, and he has to be the one trying to throw it everywhere. And I know it's a UCLA defense that, according to my kind of scout of it, is plays a lot of zone, plays some two deep safety, stuff like that takes some of that away. So you're looking at a Bo Nix situation where maybe he's starting into inadvantageous situations. So that would be kind of, if I was scripting it for UCLA, it's okay, you win on the ground, Oregon doesn't, and DTR gets some balls downfield, and Nix maybe makes a mistake or two.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I want to ask you one more question before we get to a score prediction. What is the kind of the vibe around Chip Kelly in Eugene? I mean, because he got you guys to a level where it made Oregon a national power. And I think, I'm interested to see if you'd get an ovation if you went back to Eugene. Would the fans boo him? What's the kind of relationship like from a fan perspective with the former ball coach for Oregon?
Well, I'm trying to think here. So he came back in 2018. I think some fans booed, some cheered. 2020 was no fans, so nobody was there to do either. I tend to think he'll get a fairly warm reception, but I just think in general, it's enough time has passed. He's been at UCLA now longer than he ever was at Oregon, which is kind of crazy to think. He was at Oregon for 4 years. This is his 5th year at UCLA.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of admiration and appreciation from older fans, from people who've been fans of the program for 20 plus years, who've appreciated the highs of the program under Chip, because it's pretty much that 4-year run is unmatched. I mean, I don't think there's any question. You could argue maybe if Mario had stuck around, he was going to have a similar kind of extended run of excellence, but even he kind of was up and down. And then we'll see what happens with Lanning. But before Chip, there was nothing really like it. Mike Bellotti had kind of incremental improvement success, and then they would drop back a little bit after maybe a good group of seniors departed. So I think there's a lot of appreciation for what he did here. I mean, his record was pretty immaculate at Oregon. And I think part of the reason I feel that way is when he was, when Willie Taggart left and there was that kind of brief opening, there was a lot of Oregon fans that were kind of clamoring for Chip to maybe make a return.
Yeah.
And I think would have been okay with it. I just think that's sort of an awkward situation for Chip to return with, and I think it's probably worked out better for both parties the way it's gone. But I think in general, most people are pretty supportive of Chip and would probably say most Saturdays they're supporting him, except for this one.
Yeah, and there was that brief, kind of moment last offseason where UCLA, we didn't know if they were going to give him an extension, and
Right.
Oregon happened to have an opening at that time, and the odds came out, would Chip come back to Eugene and things like that. Obviously, it's working well with Dan Lanning right now, but it's kind of a interesting, turning door situation with that. EriK, thank you so much for coming on, man. I got to ask you one final question. What is your final score prediction for Saturday's premium game, man?
Yeah, no, it's a Bruin podcast, so I hate to end it this way, but I think I have Oregon winning. I think it's going to be really, really close. I think it's going to be a little lower scoring. We haven't really talked about it, but the weather forecast shows quite a bit of rain for this one, which I think is potentially
advantageous for you guys, man.
Maybe a little bit, but I think just in general it muggies it up, maybe makes it a little bit sloppier. I think what would be really fun is just to see both these offenses execute on kind of perfect environment. And maybe the weather forecast changes. It has been forest fire season up here, and I barely go outside because the air quality is worse here than it is anywhere in the country basically right now. We need rain. I just was hoping it wouldn't be on Saturday because I really wanted to see this game played in like pristine conditions. I think so. I'm thinking a little lower scoring. I think the over/under is like 70, which is crazy. But
wow,
I have it at 34-28 Oregon. I think it's back and forth. I think these teams are, again, kind of strength on strength. And I think Oregon's ability to run the ball, UCLA's ability to run the ball, even in these conditions, will make for some high-scoring situations. I also just think ultimately, and maybe I kind of touched on it a minute ago, my sense is one of these quarterbacks is going to make a mistake at some point because they've both been so good, but they both also have histories of being a little bit mistake-prone. I know DTR was excellent last year in terms of protecting the football as well, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but my sense is that maybe he makes a mistake late in the game that kind of gives Oregon an opportunity to put it away. But yeah, I said 34-28 on our podcast this morning. I'm not gonna placate to your audience and go Bruins all of a sudden with a last second flip because that would be probably disingenuous. But I'll take Oregon 34-28 in a really great game that I think proves both teams are deserving of kind of wherever they're ranked after the week.
Man, we wouldn't expect anything less. EriK Skopil, man, thank you so much for coming on. Really a blast. We got to have to do this again very soon. Bruin Bible, we are officially